Okay. This week on Inspire Change, welcome everybody to Season 2, Episode 20 of Inspire Change with Gunter. This is overall our 40th episode on the air. And joining us today on this very special first live show is we've got three very important guests. Now, if you look at the poster and you've seen the advertisements leading up to it, we had four guests. Bernard Robichaud will be joining us on another show. He is ill this week, and so he was not able to make it. But we're still going to have a very good show. So we'll see, the famed Cyrus from Trailer Park Boys on Netflix on another episode. So let me go ahead and introduce our guest, guys. And we're going to be on this show, before I get into their intros, we're going to be discussing masculinity, feminism, solutions. We're living in some really crazy times with COVID-19 pandemic. We're just coming out of that. We worry about going back into it with, reopening too soon. We're also all the things that have come because of the pandemic. We've got police brutality, the peaceful protests, which have been amazing, but then there's also been the rioting and the looting, and all that weighs into different things going on. So Gunter and our guests, we're going to be discussing that, and we'll also have a couple people that might be joining us in a chat room on the live show. So if you do have a question, I will try to get to you, and maybe I can, we won't be able to bring you on the air, but maybe we can bring your question or your topic that will contribute. But anyway, so let's get into introducing these special guests that we have on the show today. And I'm trying to read my teleprompter, so everybody out there live, bear with me. We have Andrew Flores. He is an actor. You may have seen him recurring as a recurring special guest star on USA Network's Queen of the South. You'll also see him upcoming in two new series. One's an animated series called Hazley. That's a sci-fi series. And then he'll also be a part of a post-apocalyptic sci-fi series called The New. Then we will move on to Jahnavi Foster. She is a best-selling LA Times bestselling author of a book called Divine Love. She also wrote a cookbook recently called Mouthwatering Meatless Meals. She is an inspirational coach on nutrition and wellness as a coach and instructor, teaching at stores like Mother Earth and other some radio appearances here and there. She also spent 12 years in an ashram, and she'll be joining also in the conversation. Directed a stage production for one of the most respected and prestige Black universities, Hampton University, called Ruined. That was in 2014. And finally, that brings us currently to Gunter Swoboda, the host of our show. He's a psychologist, speaker, author, TEDx speaker, and producer. Take it away, Gunter.
Thank you, Miranda. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited about this show. I did the Myers-Briggs many years ago, and the idea that I got from it was that somehow I'm supposed to be, an extrovert. And I had to sort of at the time go, really, am I? And the reality is that I am extroverted. So part of my gig is that I need to always watch how much I say. Because I get really excited and carried away. So when there's more people, I'm really happy. On my own, it's sort of a bit like I feel a little lonely, which is also part of my history, which is that I'm an only child. So I was always looking for friends to play with that didn't include my parents. So again, thank you, Miranda, and thank you, everybody, for being here. Now, I'll just set the scene a little bit. I've been doing these podcasts on inspiring change, and the core of it is about addressing masculinity. In my book, making good men great, which is the top of my project and movement. That, as men, we really are not traveling well physically, psychologically, and socially. Our mental health statistics and suicide rates are terrible. The rates of incarceration, drug addiction, and so on are also really, really over the top. But, that's a starting point for me. What I'd like to see is that ultimately we'll transcend the issue of gender and come together as human beings, so that we are able to work together in a much, much more cooperative style, because that ultimately is what makes us as human beings successful. There's a myth that competition makes us successful, and that's actually fundamentally not true, especially when competition is placed as something of me against somebody else. I mean, I've got no problem. I'm very competitive with myself. I like to do the best that I possibly can. So one of the things that I do a lot of is working with men in groups, but also individually. And sometimes that's counseling, sometimes that's therapy, and sometimes it's essentially coaching and mentoring. And out of that came the idea for me about having meaningful conversations. Because when I look at social media, a lot of the conversations on social media are basically rubbish. They're rubbish because people don't strictly adhere to social conventions like respect, thinking about, empathy in that space. And so, in a meaningful conversation, we stay within a certain landscape and are able to hear each other, so that we can get an understanding of where each other is from. And, one of the things that someone asked me recently, do I, block people on Facebook, for example? I said, no, I don't. The only time I get, very clear disengaging is when they're really disrespectful and they're personally abusive. I have zero tolerance for abuse, because essentially that's the foundation for aggression and violence. So what I'd like us to do is to come together and, share some backgrounds. Also, that what I'm really interested in is, how can we use crisis and change in a constructive way rather than it being something that we fear and, try to avoid. So what I'd like to do is start off with, if I can invite each one of you to sort of share a little bit of your experiences about change and how you think about change, and what was really some of the pivotal moments in your lives to get you thinking and evolving as a person. What was really important. Now, I don't make any judgment. It could have been something maybe really negative, but it had a constructive outcome. So I thought I'd start with you, Amy.
Okay. I'm sorry, did you say me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Can I invite you?
Oh, yes. No. This would be fine. Thank you very much. Well, mine is probably pretty boring. When I love change. I embrace change. I think change is good and healthy, and I'm always looking for change. So let me start by saying that. I don't fear change. And Gunter, I'm absolutely with you when you talk about fear being such a negative, destructive emotion that we experience, because fear tends to make people it doesn't allow them to embrace change. So my personal experience with change was after my second divorce. I'm married for the third and last time, but after my second divorce, I wanted to figure out if it was me or a cultural concept of marriage. So I did a deep dive into anthropological studies and discovered that the 50-plus years of marriage was a relatively new concept. Up until the Industrial Revolution, most people married 2 or 3 times because women died in childbirth, men had accidents on the farm, and disease killed the rest. So that made me feel a little better. But if you go back further in time, to primitive time, most people were together 5 to 7 years, just long enough to have a child and have that child become self-sufficient, and then they mated with other partners. And there's also a biological component to choosing with whom to have children, and that's survival of the fittest. So if you want to have a wide genetic pool, you tend to marry somebody or have children with somebody that's opposite you, and there's that opposites attract. but that doesn't necessarily make strong children, but it doesn't necessarily give you a companion to go through life with, because you don't necessarily have things that you like to do in common or very much in common. So the three relationships we go through life in is the first one, which is, that blind first blush of love. The second one is who you have children with, and a lot of times, unless you're very lucky or very wise, is the person that you grow old with, that you have in common. So that was a big change for me, just realizing that I wasn't so weird and odd, and that that it was a good thing. So that was my big revelation.
To that, Amy. Andrew, you and I are the blokes on the show. I hope you'll be okay with my Australianisms. So tell me a little bit about what happened for you that sort of, it was a standout experience, or some standout experiences in your life.
Well, for me, a little bit of background. I'm born here in Houston, but I was raised in a small town called Waller, and there's a nickname for that. Give us a holler in Waller. And so, my childhood was basically happy, but then change happened when my dad and my mom divorced. That was something that I was not used to. So I guess sometimes I have an issue with change. Other subjects, not so much. Yeah. I can remember when a teacher, I was going through some really bad times in my teenage years because, the folks separating. And then I had one teacher tell me that I was ugly and that I would never amount to anything. Completely something that I didn't want to hear. And
no,
so
absolutely.
It was detrimental for him to say something like that, and so I also had people, other mentors in the community that helped me, and, there were times I wanted to quit school, and I didn't, and so they encouraged me to stay. I do believe that people can change. A few years ago, I was putting in the septic system, and the man who was putting in, he goes, I tell you, and he was referring to my neighbors. My neighbors are very religious. They're very nice people, very well kept. They kept to themselves and mind their own business. They're from California. They're black, very sweet people. And he goes, I am racist SOB that you will come across, but I will do anything for that lady in a little blue house that was in the back of the property for my neighbors. And when he said that, it really told me, wow, how people can change, no matter how, people can be so hateful, but yet they can change. It's not so much the mind, but also the heart. And so that had a very big effect on me, as the people can change.
Okay, thanks for that, Andrew. Jahnavi, I'm very interested in your story. 12 years in an ashram.
Yeah, and it had nothing to do with my upbringing. Not at all. I was raised agnostic. So it was a really radical change. It kind of took everybody by surprise, but talk about, walking to the beat of your own drum. So tells you a little bit about my personality. Always following my path, even if it's not popular, So it was really, what led up to my decision was a really big change that happened when my sister died, and when I was 14, and without any type of spiritual or religious upbringing, I didn't have that to ground me and to pull from as other people might have. So I just made it my life's quest to try to make sense of life, because life made no sense to me. My world was turned upside down. And I didn't know how I was going to navigate my way through that type of trauma. And it was survival, like to say, okay, well, my sister's not here. I'm here. Why am I here? I need to know what is my purpose. Otherwise, what is the point? It really drove me to say, if I don't make, sense out of life, and my reason for being here and my reason for existing, then why even bother? So it was really my need to survive. What will drive me to want to continue on in my life, unless I have some meaning and purpose. So when I went to college, I was studying philosophy and trying to find answers and talking to like every religious person I could and taking books and absorbing everybody's ideas. And eventually I started reading different Vedic Indian scriptures, and it just resonated with me. I embrace everybody's true path. It resonated for me. It was personal. And so at a certain point, age 20, I said, you know what? I just want this fully. And I made the decision to really just to live outside of mainstream society and completely immerse myself in spirituality, because I felt like I needed to get closer to the truth, the divine, love, God, however you want to say it, because life was just so confusing for me as a teenager growing up. So that kind of is what drove me to go to the ashram. And then I stayed because once I was there, I felt like my spiritual growth became such an important aspect of my life. I thought, wow, we don't talk about spiritual growth. Yeah. We talk about emotional growth and physical growth and taking care of ourselves. But I realized that my spiritual well-being was the most important part of my life. And I was willing to dedicate this time in my life because I really did gain a lot of it. I don't feel like it's a sacrifice. If you feel like, no, I'm doing it because I want to be here. Yeah. I'm not giving something up and somebody's making me give up things. No, I was embracing this change because I was getting something out of it, which was really feeling more grounded and making sense of my existence and feeling more connected to my purpose for being here and establishing a relationship with God as we may perceive him or her.
Thanks for that, Jahnavi. Now, I'm going to ask a question to all three of you. What is it that you think stopped you from taking a completely different path, and in many cases, a destructive path? Because I work with a lot of teenagers and young men, for example, who have gone through similar experiences, the loss of somebody, divorce, being in a relationship that's really toxic. And for some of them, it's taken them down a really self-destructive path. The question that's always interested me is, what is it that makes us choose the other? How is it that we come through this? So who'd like to go first?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
I'll go. I was just going to say that, there was a time when I thought about suicide as a teenager, but I also come to realize that I'm a big chicken of pain. I cannot fathom the idea of, I tried to put the little news just to see what it like. Oh, no, this is not going to work. So I'll just try to see how I can solve the problem. People become in a different, in that situation, it all depends on the person and the situation, that it comes to be a part of desperation, and it's like there's no way out. Yeah. And some, they are successful, unfortunately, at doing that, and then there are those who may somehow, some way, are talked out of it, or they reason with themselves and they don't follow through, which is a good thing. Yeah. So it's in the idea of desperation, of what no other alternative. They feel like there's nothing else. This is the only solution.
So somehow you found, in a sense, the light at the end of the tunnel. Something made you go, okay, it might have been as simple as, I don't like pain. Right. Okay, thanks for that. Amy?
Gunter, that is a very complicated and complex question, because I think that, I think there's so many factors that go into it. Genetics, upbringing, environment, education, resources that you might have available, the people that are around you. I don't know what has kept me moving forward. Probably just a huge dose of curiosity. I am so curious about the world around me and about the people I meet, and so I've never, and I have, periodically ventured down a destructive path, but I've always pulled myself back very quickly before I went down there very far. But I don't know, it's a complicated question.
It's worth reflecting on, though, isn't it?
What's that?
It's worth reflecting on.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
Because, one of the things that's bandied around a lot is this issue about resilience. It's become a buzzword in psychology, right? Now, the question is, so what does resilience actually look like, and how do we get there?
Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because the very first documentary I ever did was called Wired for Life, but it was about brain development and birth to 5. And so I had children at the time that were already older, but I realized, and I used to say, anybody can die for them. I need to be there for the teenage years because I remember the teenage years. Yeah. But what we discovered was that in birth to 5, 90% of the brain is developed from birth to 5.
Yeah.
And so what happens in those first 5 years is so important and really, is impactful for the rest of your life unless you make a very concerted effort to, make changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, the 0 to 5, the Jesuits had the principle, give me the boy to the age of 7 and I will give you the man.
There we go. Absolutely.
And that's a tradition in the Jesuit order. So, Jahnavi, what about for you? Losing your sister is a tragic experience, especially for a little one.
Yeah, it was definitely a very difficult experience.
How old were you? I'm sorry.
I was 14.
14.
I was 14. My sister was, she died a week before she turned 19. Yeah. She had leukemia, and she had suffered for 2 years with chemo and radiation.
I'm so sorry.
So I kind of watched her suffer.
Yeah.
And, so it definitely alters your childhood. Because I was 12. So I was in the hospital a lot with her and the whole family, and going through that as a family. I think having a strong family support system was so essential for me. And I feel so blessed that I had not just the immediate family, because the immediate family obviously was broken when my sister was gone, but we had a wonderful extended family that I grew up with, and my mother's college friends who all had kids together, and we all were raised together. And having that strong unit, I think, is just imperative to be able to help somebody get through really difficult times. If you have to go at it alone, I don't know how anybody could do that.
Yeah.
And
Jahnavi, you're raising a really serious and important issue, and that is that currently one of the, criticisms of our culture that I've got is that we've become extraordinarily I-centric. Philip Zimbardo, who's a psychologist at Hampton University, talks about that, and he says that essentially we need to balance that out with being more sociocentric. That is community-based, family-based, community-based. The importance of human connection. One of the things that I, as a therapist, often have to work with, and it's a common issue, is the issues about fears of rejection and abandonment. And in a lot of cases, people have actually had those experiences. They're not imagined. Having a parent who's cold and unaffectionate or highly transactional in their interaction with the child. So you get lots of love if you're doing the right thing according to the parent, but you get rejected if you don't. And so I think that's a really, really important issue.
Yeah.
So I'm actually sitting here with my guests, who I would put into the bracket of very resilient. Okay, so let me bring in the issue of us at the moment facing some seriously monumental social issues. So we have, as Miranda said, issues about climate change. We've got issues about pandemics. We've got also issues about significant social change, the issue about, gender and racism. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are around those sorts of things, because all of that implies change, and whether we like it or not, we're in a process of change. And it may feel chaotic at the moment, but what's happening for you in that context? Jahnavi?
Hi. Well, because of my background, I'm in a unique position to talk about racism because my mother is white and my father is black. And I grew up with what we would call white privilege, which means that people didn't get scared to get into an elevator with me or cross the street because they didn't want to be near me, that type of white privilege. So this week, I have had so many conversations with racists, and it's intense.
I can imagine.
A very intense thing, but I feel like it's so important to talk about racism.
Yeah.
And they're white women that I'm talking racism about. And I feel like it's that dialogue that people have to have that's so uncomfortable, but it's so important because there are mindsets, and most of them are erroneous.
Yeah.
They're based on false conceptions, not just misconceptions, actually false conceptions.
Yeah.
So in my conversations, I really realized that the way of thinking is just wrong. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
Because it's based on a false idea about an entire race of people.
Yeah.
The word I kept hearing, their plight is self-inflicted.
In Australia, in Australia, racism is a lot more subtle than what it is in the United States. We have, a systemic attitude, but because of the, lack of numbers here, First Nation in Australia, Aboriginal, has really been shrunk. It's historical evidence that, it was actually very, very deliberate, almost a sort of.
Oh, what happened?
They won't, they won't participate the way that they should. They won't do the things that they should. They get into drugs, all that sort of thing. And people isolate the context that they live in. And so, it's a really important issue. And I don't think we have enough conversations in schools and at university levels or in the community as a whole to actually broaden that out. You worked with black students on a play.
Oh yes,
is that right?
Absolutely. It was an African American cast, and I've done a lot of. I am attracted to talking about racial issues, because I don't know why, but I did a 26 series podcast called Hampton Hidden's History, and it was really about the Native American, African American history of Hampton, which is the longest continuous English settlement in America. Yeah. And it's where the first African Americans landed at this one spot in Hampton, Virginia, and it's also where slavery began to crumble.
Yeah.
And at this very same geographic location. So it's got a lot of interesting things around it, but also I live in a lower socioeconomic minority community. And it is, friends are most African American, and the government is run by African American, politicians and board of supervisors. Yeah. And I'm very lucky that I get to have a lot of conversations, because I too was raised with white privilege, and we're never going to solve most of our issues in a nice way for a long, long time until we go back and solve what is our greatest sin in America, and that is the sin of enslaving, kidnapping, and enslaving people. And I get so frustrated because I periodically, growing up in Texas, would hear, that happened 200 years ago, or 400, and they need to be. But when you have been able to, create operational and, when there were Jim Crow laws up until 1960, 100 years from 1860 to 1960, and we have 100 years to go until, we can deal with this in a way that's smart and compassionate.
Yeah.
and realistic.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Amy. Andrew,
Yeah.
now I'm assuming Flores is Spanish, am I right?
That's correct. I speak Spanish too. Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, my background's German, so I'm really very much stuck in the white privilege.
I am German as well. Yes, German blood as well.
Yeah, well, when I did my DNA, one of the things I discovered was that a lot of my bloodline's actually in the United States as well.
Wow.
So, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that region.
Come on up.
So, and I live in what I call a very vanilla environment. The northern beaches of Sydney is probably the least racially diverse community I have ever seen, and I've travelled. So it's really interesting. It's changing a little bit, but the moment we have obviously an African person walking down the street, it's a novelty. It's like, oh wow, and the immediate thing, because it's a very wealthy environment, is a lot of people go, well, how can they afford to live here? It's this sort of like as if they shouldn't. There's these cognitive biases that come with white and especially male privilege, because one of my arguments is that what we're facing is in fact an artifact of patriarchy. We focus patriarchy on gender, but it's not confined to gender. It's confined to anybody who is different. And so that includes ethnicity, race. I mean, I grew up in post-World War II Austria. My family was, meshed in a sense in the turmoil of the Second World War. Now, fortunately, my grandfather was not a racist, despite the fact that he got conscripted in the army, served on the Russian front. But he always saw it as bad, and he really gave me that message that whenever people discriminate against anybody else, it's not right. But he had no choice but to participate. Otherwise, the whole family would have ended up in a concentration camp. So, Andrew, have you had, with your background, any sort of experiences in that nature where you were discriminated against, or that you had friends that had discriminated against?
Yes. Where I'm from, the little town of Waller, it had its issues of racism. There are three cities in the area where I live. There's Hempstead, and in the middle is Prairie View A&M University, which is a black college, and then Waller. The school when I went to, for some reason I was not liked. I don't know what I did for them not to like me. I don't know what it could have been, but in a way, I guess it was a form of racism. Yeah. I didn't even bother to go to the prom, but and I think even my parents might have experienced racism when they were coming up. Because it's Texas. They're both residents of Texas, and there at that time it was not just about no blacks allowed. It was also Mexicans, Spanish, not welcomed.
Yeah.
So I don't think they talked about it, but from what I gathered from my sisters, that they experienced some form of racism, and that was the norm at that time. Yeah. And it's just the situation. I mean, I saw two friends of mine on social media, pretty much disband their friendship because one of them says all lives matter, and when I heard that, I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, I get that," and then not really thinking, and then the other person who happens to be black was saying, the frustrations. And so I said, well, why is she getting upset? And so I did a little digging. So just part of my ignorance that I didn't know as to why Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
I was able to educate myself. It's not necessarily, yes, all lives matter, but at the moment it's about Black Lives Matter because of the situation that happened a couple of weeks ago with Mr. George Floyd. Which I had to go to the viewing, and I did get a chance to go to the viewing this week because I wanted to see, and I also wanted to see, this is also pretty part of history, so I had to see and also talk with people, and I was able to talk with different people, and just to get their viewpoints, and so it was just an amazing experience, and I'm glad I got to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting experience. I get the same from men when the issue about the homicide or the domestic violence issue comes up, where they go, yes, but men are also attacked. They're also killed by intimate partners. And it's really frustrating because, in essence, when you look at it purely from a numbers point of view, the number of men that get killed by their intimate partner is actually very small. And that's not the issue. I mean, violence at any point is not a solution, and we need to address both. But firstly, we need to, in my view, acknowledge and take accountability for the bigger picture and really address that. It's a bit like, when I first heard the, all lives matter, well, yes, but first of all, we need to address the harm and the wrong that's been done to, different groups of people historically. Now, we can't undo history, and that's where I get a little frustrated at the moment when TV networks and, streaming networks are taking programs off like Gone with the Wind, because I think that if we sanitize our history, we are going to lose the capacity to learn from it, because it's a bit like, the number of people that I've met in the United States who have very little knowledge about the Holocaust. And when I listen to them, I can hear the sort of, discriminatory language slipping in about, Jews and, Arabs and all of that, and the division that sort of very subtly, I'm coming back to that idea about cognitive bias that comes along. So I think go on, Amy.
Well, I was just going to say, Gunter, not too long ago, maybe last year, I had always loved Gone with the Wind, and it was one of my mother's favorite films, and we watched it periodically. So my husband had never seen it all the way through. So I pulled it out, and we started watching it. And as we were watching it, I began to get really uncomfortable with in the film. So what do I do with that?
I'd like to answer. I think in a way these films are, in its own, it's great art. But I think if we were to totally eradicate it, then we're liable to repeat the same course again.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew.
With the Holocaust, I mean, it's important history. We need this history because as uncomfortable as it is, if it disappears, we're liable to repeat it again.
And so let me answer that issue about being uncomfortable. For me, as a therapist, one of the things that I often have to take someone through if they're going to change is to be able to sit with the discomfort. Feel the pain. Men need to feel the pain before they can actually change and grow and evolve. And I believe that to be true of all of us as human beings, both individually as well as collectively. So for me, when I talk about the issues of patriarchy, that's at the core of the whole problem. It's, I talk about patriarchy essentially being based on 4 values: territoriality, hierarchy, acquisition, and competitiveness. So when you put the 4 together, the 5th element that emerges is being combative. And when we look at what happens in our culture, right, those 5 elements are constantly in play. And I talk about the transition into being more inclusive, more respectful and democratic, more distributive. And that's not just materially, it's on every level. I mean, one of the things that I get in couples counselling a lot is that men don't express themselves well emotionally, so the partner feels in isolation of it. And it's uncomfortable for us as men often to embrace sharing. One of the things that leads into emotional distress from patriarchy is that we bring boys especially up with a narrow emotional band, a lack of empathy, and a certain level we need to disregard.
Gunter, you faded out a little bit. I'm just going to step in. If you can just reiterate the last couple of sentences. I think it was just an interference.
Okay, Okay, so coming back to, if we take the big picture and we include that a lot of this stuff may be based on patriarchal ideology, then that ideology needs to be defined. So I define patriarchy as being territorial, about being hierarchical, about being acquisitional, and about being competitive. In other words, things become often possessions. So men often talk about their partners, for example, as my wife, not as a stewardship, but as an ownership. And it's the same with children, right? I see Giovanni nodding and Amy smiling. So it's one of the foundations that makes family law an absolute disaster, because it's a struggle about who owns what, right? The problem is that we've got that at a high level socially as well, right? So the capacity shift into values that are not ideological but values based, like, for example, being inclusive. Why should I treat someone differently because they happen to have different colour skin, different religion, different ethnicity? It doesn't make any sense. I need to respect each other's humanity, and I need to be able to be much more distributive. I find it actually immoral that there are people out there who own, trillions of dollars. 80% of the world's wealth is actually located in a very, very small number of people, 1 to 5%. That's crazy in my book.
It's absolutely,
it's evil.
It's unconscionable.
Yeah.
With some people, it's not hurting.
Yeah. So as a society, as a culture, I think that's really important. Now, the question that comes up with that is, what is it that we're going to need to create an evolution rather than a revolution? Because revolutions generally tend to just get us back to the same shit.
I'm hoping that what's going on in the world right now, what we're all experiencing with, climate change and all the tension around George Floyd and race relations, that, this is a time globally that we can, come together and legislatively and spiritually and psychologically have, systemic change.
Yeah.
I had a friend that sent me a video yesterday of a wonderfully articulate African-American woman, talking about what's happening now. And it was filled with some explicative, very harsh curse words. And she said, I hope you won't find this offensive. Yeah. And so what I wrote her back is, what I find offensive is that in 2020, we're no further along than we are.
Yeah.
And what I find offensive is the pain and suffering, my African-American brothers and sisters endured and are still enduring. Yeah. And I hope that this moment in time is the one where the majority rises up and publicly agrees through legislation and social contracts and actions that we're not going to allow the systemic dehumanization of our connected human family to be abused and exploited and denigrated and left without hope.
Yeah. They're really important thoughts. I mean, let me bring in, one of my podcasts was, Anti-Feminism, Let's Lose the Attitude. And so, if I go, the whole idea of anti-feminism, gender, the gender war, racism and so on have got this, interconnection. The idea is we're going to need some pretty radical, and very courageous leadership in this space. One of the things that I'm not seeing a lot of, and Giovanni, you might want to come in on this as well, is a spiritual shift.
It's not a topic that usually gets integrated into the conversation, even though if we really went there, it would help to resolve a lot of things.
Oh.
You start basing things on, spiritual premises, then we are all equal. You can't really deny that, because when you go to a spiritual place, we're not even talking about a physical manifestation of your body. We're talking about the essence of your soul and your spirit and who you are.
Oh.
So when you go there, but people don't act on that platform, so we have to take steps back to just say, okay, it's a spiritual value to be compassionate and empathetic and loving and kind and tolerant and patient and all those things. So we have to do that first before we can even go deeper into spirituality, because we're not even at the basic level of spiritual expression, of just treating each other like equal, brothers and sisters, that we all should be able to share equally in the advantages of a society or of a culture. And we don't see that. We don't have that. I think we've made progress. I mean, when I think back to, the 1960s, my father grew up in segregation. So, I know that things are different. I know we're making steps for sure. But I think we have a long way to go before I think people are even able to delve into a deeper aspect of their spiritual selves, which is really eventually, I think, where we need to go for really deep, lasting change.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can go back and forth and teeter-totter on, social justice issues.
Gunter, what do you think? What kind of leadership do you think that we need?
The framework that I'll work with is that individually we need to raise our self-awareness to become more flexible and therefore more adaptive and therefore more resilient. And that needs to happen in that 0 to 7 age group. We need to... the idea that kids need to have an environment where they're emotionally raised in a warm, loving, inclusive environment and without ideologies. Because one of the things that our education system and our tertiary system is based on is cognitive development above and beyond emotional development. We need to flip that. So leadership needs to happen in a developmental process. So I work with men. One of the things that we often work with is how to be more physically self-aware. A lot of men are not physically aware. It takes them forever to go to the doctor, and often it's too late. The next step is to be able to understand oneself psychologically, emotionally, cognitively. What are my values, attitudes, beliefs? What is that based on? But the other part of it is what's my emotional language like? And so then the next step is being able to introduce that in my capacity to be authentic in relationships. And after that, once we have a much greater understanding and capacity to adapt, that's when I believe that we will move more into a spiritual place. Now, that's not religious. It's not ideological. It's a values. It's a values base. It's a feeling of, I studied Zen for a few years, and for me, the whole idea of this sort of transpersonal and almost, non-attached ego state became very, very important. Let me be aware of my body, my breathing, let my head do its monkey thing, but ultimately that's not where it's really at. It's just a process. And I think we spend very, very little time, and I watch corporate programs being rolled out now about resilience and, people practicing mindfulness. And I'm going, this is, unfortunately, it's just simply going to be a fad. It's not really going to go to the depth of, where we need to be. I mean, one of the things that I was very interested in was in the culture in Okinawa. And they have a very, very community that's based on a good work ethic and a lot of participation, and they take care of themselves physically and all of that. We don't do that in our culture. Amy, on obese kids. I see lots of teenage boys whose level of activity due to digital media is very limited.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just about to say, they often have very thin two-dimensional relationships with especially their dads, right? I mean, I often ask boys, what does your dad do? And they go, I think he's in sales. They also don't have a family history. So what did your grandfather do? I don't know. Right. And so that's one of the foundation pieces in creating change. And people say, well, this is going to be really slow, and I get meaningful. Does that make sense?
It is also complicated, and I live in an agricultural community. I was sent out here about 8 years ago to interview my husband, and ended up marrying him and staying. And he is a farmer and a lawyer, and so we have a 400-acre diverse working farm that we work. And this last documentary, the Virginia Peanut Story, I got to interview tons and tons of farmers, elderly farmers, before they passed away, and 2 of them died while we were filming, and I was so glad that we got their interviews. But my point is that, Gunter, a lot of these problems are loss of community. And so they all talked about, how the agricultural community for a while was, very close, and people helped each other. And, if you finished your harvesting and your neighbor hadn't, then you would go help them. The other thing that I keep seeing out here is that, kids are not challenged anymore. We've extended their childhood. It used to be around 13, 14 years old, they were taking on adult duties. And we don't allow our children to do that anymore, so we don't provide them any challenges. They're not physically challenged at all. They're allowed to, because of many reasons, safety, digital media, all kinds of things. But especially our boys, they're not being challenged. There's no coming of age. There's no, thing they strive for to become a man, to be able to, think deeply and to be challenged and to problem solve and to take responsibility.
Yeah, well put, Amy. Andrew, what are you thinking?
Well, I would just, in terms of empathy, I think if we were able to step into the other person's shoes, that maybe perhaps we could have more of an understanding of what people are going through, the pain that people are going through. So a lot of frustration that I talk to a lot of people, in connection, for example, the Black Lives Matter, the frustration that they feel is that, that people that are supposed to be our allies are not really listening to what we're saying.
Yes.
And it really made me think about, okay, yes, all lives do matter. Right now, it's about all Black Lives Matter. It's the systemic racism does exist, in my view. I saw a movie the other day called Just Mercy, and it's based on a true story of these men that are in prison and are on death row before their trial in Alabama, in the state of Alabama. And so a lot of stuff that we hear that some people call it a myth, I differ from that thought. And I just think that I think if we had the ability to understand what people are going through, then that's the creation of how we can develop and how we change ourselves. So it all starts with ourselves.
Yeah. I've just got the signal from Miranda, but this gone for a long time, and I'd love to do it again. In fact, Amy, if I come back to your thing about what do I think about leadership, what do we need at this point? We need a leadership that is not economically focused only. We need a leadership that's chosen for morality, for ethics, for personality. The strong man in our society, the true patriarch, is toxic, and they will destroy us. And they've taken us to the brink on a number of occasions. World War I was a good example, World War II, and this is where I come back. If we don't learn from history, we are going to be condemned to keep repeating the same thing and again and again and again. And so,
when women rule the world, we will not go to war nearly as often. That's for sure.
We'll talk it out.
Yeah.
Thoughtful solutions that benefit everybody.
Look, I'm very sympathetic to that view. The problem that we've got, and this, I'd love to do this again with more of a focus on feminism and the anti-feminism that's emerged, is because women have been enrolled in the patriarchal ideology as much as men.
Exactly.
When I look at leadership programs in corporations, they're teaching women to be be patriarchal. not masculine.
No, I read a book years ago called "Working Women Don't Have Wives," and the gist of the book was that the corporate world will never change while women are putting on suits and working 60 hours a week and acting like men. The corporate world will change for the better when men begin to act more like women and place, family and equality of work life and all of, all the issues that go along with that as the first priority.
And the COVID pandemic has because one of the things that I see in my neighborhood has been lots of guys pushing prams, taking kids out for a walk, really being at home and engaged with the family while still also having time to work. And so this is where I see a crisis being productive and constructive really coming in. Okay. There's an list. So look, at this point, I think we need to wrap it. So let me really, a very warm and heartfelt thanks to all of you. It's been lovely meeting you. I hope that we can do this again, actually. There's lots, as I said, we could spend the next couple of hours just, talking this through. But I also think that if we stay in this space, then we have these conversations at multiple different points. It's like, setting up the seeds elsewhere. And that's ultimately what's going to bind a community together. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, Amy, Jahnavi, for coming on the show. This has been a great discussion. I mean, there's a couple of times I wanted to jump in, but there was just so much liveliness, and I think we hit so many points that I think we need to continue this conversation for maybe future episodes. And also, I think maybe the next one, maybe my my actual studio office where I did most of the podcast will be open by then because I think towards the end there I had an ice maker right next to my home office and it was going off at the beginning of the show. So all those that were out there listening, if you heard that, that's what happens when you're kind of coming out of quarantine. We're still in these home office environments, and even with the doors shut and closed, and you still get weird noises. And then all of a sudden, I literally, because we have our fur babies, one kitty just literally walked across me, so I don't know if you caught that. And then she almost stepped on the switchboard. So I was like, okay, I can't control that. So if you hear meowing, but you know what? Cat's trying to eat the mic, it happens. But it was, in the most part, it was a really good, like I say, what happens live. And, we hit on a lot of number of things. And it's all about, is what we're trying to talk about on Inspire Change, is for people to come to a balanced, background. And one of the people in the chat room actually said she heard the cat. Anyway, it's okay, it's character. They want to be the center of attention. But anyway, it's about finding the balance. It's about understanding white privilege. I think Jimmy Kimmel went out on his platform and actually in his monologue explained, so people could see it on that background, that it doesn't mean if you're white, you haven't gone through struggles, No one gave me anything either, but that's not what that's about. People need to really understand it's not, we've all have struggles, no matter what race you are. But it's about, Black Lives Matter and white privilege. What it is can you get, so many people, even and if you're Latino or any other than white, especially the black community, you see a cop pull you over for even a stop sign, and you're like, holy crap, are they going to mistake me for somebody? Or, there's a fear. And why should anybody have that fear? When we were all created equal to begin with, and why should we have that fear? It's really not fair. So I think we brought out really, until we get to the bottom of it, history will repeat. Same thing, and not diving into, there's all kinds of, when we were in the virtual green room earlier, we were talking about conspiracy theories. There's always some truth in that, but I don't know if you want in your wrap up, if you want to mention some of that, Gunter, but just we have a few minutes before I have to close this, but we'll continue this conversation forward. But once again, I want to thank all of our guests, Andrew Flores, Jahnavi Foster, Amy Drewry, and of course, our host Gunter Swoboda for enlightening. And this was really meant to be where everybody has their own expertises. This was a general, everyday people talking. We're going to have more shows, and we're going to continue this because feminism, masculinity, it all ties together, and we have to work together to inspire change. Again. So I hope everybody wants to be on a future show, because I think you're stuck now because y'all did such a great job, and we really appreciate everything.
And I think the arts are an integral part of that whole process. And so, this is where I go. If we start stunting the arts, restricting it, we're going to lose a major aspect in creating evolution. Writing, film, theatre, music, the whole bit. So let's stay creative.
Yes. And I'm going to give one final shout out into, let's say maybe just a quick sentence from each of our guests. If you want to say something to the audience and the listeners, just in your own words, just quickly as I sign out, and then I'm going to close out with my closing remarks to end the show. Let's start with Andrew.
Be safe, folks. I love you all. I wish good fortune and good health to you all.
Amy?
Thank you so much, Miranda, for having us. And I would just encourage everybody to listen more, talk less.
Exactly. And Jahnavi?
Stay and think about walking in another person's shoes and have empathy for others.
Exactly. And our host, Gunter, one final word.
Yeah, all of that resonates very strongly with me, especially looking at people's shoes and compassion and respect. But also, let's not let fear, take us away into a place that we don't need to be. Let's, we can feel fear, but we don't need to act badly. Embrace negative emotions, but don't let them rule you. Because ultimately, at the bottom of it is that we can become, the masters of our own destiny in this, and bring other people with us.
Exactly. Okay, and if you guys will just hang on after I do my closing remarks and we go off the air, just have a couple of off the line remarks. It will only take a few minutes, but that ends our show of Inspire Change. So again, thank you all to our guests. Thank you all you listeners for our 40th episode 20 of season 2. We've got a renewal for a season 3. We keep going forward, and we've got more shows, and we're going to continue this conversation. If you want to be a guest on the show, you want to talk about your feelings or whatnot, email development@noirtainment.com. Noirtainment is spelled like entertainment, except take off the en. It's just noir, NOIRTAINMENT.com, and development. Like I said, once again, everybody, thank you for being on the show. We have more continued, and I will announce what the next show will be. If you missed the live show, it will be syndicated on all of our global platforms, including after this broadcast, it'll be on Apple Podcasts, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google, Deezer, Alexa. Believe me, there's more, and I can't name them all, but those are the big ones. And so you'll be able to catch it as well. Thank you again. Thank you for listening, everybody, and have a great day. Be peaceful, be balanced, be moderate, and inspire change.